Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Full Stack Chat podcast. My name is Brian Morrison. I am your host today, here with Andrew MacLean, who's going to walk us through his work at Twilio as developer educator, and then some of the side projects, I guess the DevEd projects that he's built along his career. He has a very interesting career path, so I'm excited to dive into that. Before we do, if this is your first time here, thanks for joining. This podcast is typically me interviewing a guest, whether they are building something they're looking to generate some side revenue off of, like a real world project, or we also invite dev tool companies on to talk about their offerings and how they can potentially help developers build stuff better, faster, stronger. A couple of quick announcements before we talk to Andrew. So I'm changing the we've been in a little bit of a hiatus, and that's basically just due to my personal workload. So we're going to be back for the next couple of months, but I'm moving to a bi-weekly schedule as opposed to a weekly schedule, just to kind of hedge off and balance life and work, as well as getting to talk to awesome people in our community. Also moving to a seasonal model. So we're booking out guests through the end of the summer, and then probably going to take a small break after that once again, just to kind of recoup, find some more awesome guests to talk to. So those are just a couple of quick changes that are going to be coming down the pipe. But with that, Andrew, I will pass it over to you to introduce yourself to everybody who is watching and or listening.
Amazing. Well, Brian, first off, I want to say thank you so much for having me. For anybody who's listening, Brian and I had sort of set up to have me on Full Stack not too long ago, and then we weren't able to make it work. And I was like, oh, this is super disappointing. And so I was super excited when Brian reached out and said, hey, there's this opportunity to come back again. But yeah, so my name's Andrew MacLean. I currently work as a developer educator at Twilio. A little more on that soon. I'm also a classically trained classroom educator. So I went to school to get a degree in teaching high school science, and then taught some middle school and some university courses, and then obviously now working, teaching, and educating developers at Twilio.
Awesome. Thanks for that intro. So before we actually get into talking about Twilio or some of the things that you've worked on, I love to kick off my podcast with a small icebreaker question that is not necessarily tech related, just so people can get to know you and myself. I know we've crossed paths a couple times at different conferences and online, but we really haven't had a chance to sit down and kind of have a conversation. So I'm really excited just to hear more about you and your experience. But let's start off with the icebreaker. So what is a weird talent or hobby that you have that might surprise people?
Oh man, these are like the icebreaker questions that get you a weird talent or hobby. So I've only just started getting into like finding hobbies. I've been like so into like work for so long, but I did recently get to take the stage at a drag show and sing some karaoke, took the mic out into the audience, and I did have one of the folks that worked at the venue say, have you ever considered doing this professionally? And so I feel like my unexpected talent is I may have a future as a drag performer.
Interesting. Okay. That is definitely a interesting talent or hobby. So thank you for sharing that experience though. That's awesome. Um, okay, well with that, fun stuff out of the way, let's get down to business. So you introduced yourself a little bit as a classically trained classroom teacher. What else can you tell me about your background or experience that has led you from potentially where you started as a teacher over to what we actually really both do as developer educators for dev tool companies?
Yeah, I mean, so I actually didn't even start out as an educator. So I went to school back in the day. I loved applied science, and so I'd gone back to school, or I'd gone to school initially to become a forensic scientist. And so, like that classic CSI TV shows for anybody out there that's listening or watching, I really wanted to be that like cool guy that went up and said an awesome line and then took off his glasses or put them on. And I finished up my degree kind of in 2010. And the market was weird, and I landed the job I ended up being able to land was working at a youth center, because I'd done a lot of work with young people when I was kind of like summer camps and stuff like that. And the first job they gave me is they looked at me and they're like, You seem like the kind of guy that would know how to build a website. Could you like build a website for us? I had no idea what I was doing. I'd been kind of techie my whole life, but I'd never sort of really built a full out website before. And so that was sort of, it's funny looking back, that was kind of the start of my youth work, education, technology stuff. And then fast forward over the years, I kept landing in kind of these weird overlaps between technology and learning. And I landed a job working at a university running youth programs. And I was asked, like, hey, could you build like a boot camp for high school students that are interested in the tech industry? And that was actually what opened the door to my entire career in the tech industry. So I met with like dozens of CEOs and CTOs and engineering leaders and said, like, what would happen if you could build the perfect training program? And through that, met some amazing people that went on to found other companies where I kind of started doing community work. And then, yeah, through acquisitions and kind of changes in the space, sort of went from community manager to a developer relations manager. So like sort of an everything DevRel. Yeah. And then like, I guess 3 months ago, joined the Twilio ecosystem team.
That's exciting. That's a cool journey too. Now, forgive me if I'm dating you a little bit, but when you say building your first website, what was the kind of tech stack back then that you had worked with?
All right. So I had played around. I had been very vanilla. Like I didn't understand that HTML, CSS, and JavaScript were not like the only stack that existed out there. So like when I earlier built these things, I'd done some things in like WordPress and played around with it, and I'd like built some sort of like from scratch with vanilla. But for this website, I was actually like, they'd wanted some very specific things, slash I was like all about the like the UX UI. And so I ended up using a tool that was similar to Dreamweaver. But it was called Zara Web Designer, and it was like a company that had been, it was like an offshoot of Corral, if you remember Corral WordPerfect back in the day. And so it was this great WYSIWYG website developer that allowed me to do all these things, but the code that it output was super, super, super bad. And I actually had a professional web designer that came and volunteered with the youth center a number of years later, and she was like, you know that this is like not good code, right? And I was like, okay. But their whole purpose was to keep you within their ecosystem. Yeah, so I'd done a little PHP, I'd done sort of like some vanilla stuff in building out some static pages. And then Zara was my stack. I still love it. It still is around if you're interested in checking
Really?
it. Yeah, it still exists. So if you Google like Zara XARA web designer, there's like a new version. But I feel like WYSIWYG web developer or like platforms and tools are more popular now. Like there's more people that are doing sort of like low code, no code environments. And so it's actually become a better platform probably now than it was like 15 years ago now.
Yeah, it seems like some of these low code like WYSIWYG editors, they've gotten a lot of love where they can actually output code that is reasonable to your to an actual developer to go in and start working with and whatnot. At least for some of this stuff that I've seen.
Absolutely. And the issue with this code was it output like a specialized like XML format. So it was just like the output wasn't truly bad. It was just bad if like you as an indie developer or like a single person
Yeah,
wanted to go in and edit the code. It was just really, really hard to do.
yeah, understandable. Okay, well, thanks for that. Now let's move over to Twilio. So you started with Twilio 3 months ago, and I am kind of like I know Twilio is kind of a monster in the dev tool space, but I'm kind of embarrassed to say that I don't have a lot of experience with Twilio, and I'm not 100% sure all of the offerings they do. I know some of the things, but can you explain a little bit about what Twilio offers to developers?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like full disclosure, like I'm not sort of a representative of Twilio on the podcast, and so like just to kind of put that out there. So Twilio, like customer experience as a service. So Twilio kind of started out. It's about a 15, 16-year-old company. Started off in sort of the kind of telecommunication space. So if you wanted to programmatically have somebody call a number and then be able to kind of go through that, press 1 to go here, press 2 to go here, like that was Twilio that did that. And then sort of that kind of expanded out into the system that kind of underlies all those text messages that you receive. And now the company actually has kind of grown to be this huge sort of like customer experience, customer engagement at scale. So if you've ever used SendGrid, so SendGrid is owned by Twilio. It's a Twilio company. Segment is another company that you might have heard of, and Segment is also part of the Twilio ecosystem. And then obviously all of those core communication technologies are kind of still there as the underlying. So it's a huge product suite. I mean, we could spend an entire episode just talking about all the amazing stuff that Twilio is doing. And I'm super excited to be part of the ecosystem team. And so my kind of focus is trying to educate folks about all of the things that we do have to offer and to create some connections between the different pieces that exist within the ecosystem that might not seem connected.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think I wanted to just kind of echo something you had mentioned earlier, you not being a representative of Twilio on the podcast. I think one of the interesting things about at least the people that I've talked to in this podcast, this is episode, I'm approaching 20. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but like everyone here is just super passionate about tech in general. So even those people who do come at, they work for a dev tools company, it's like we just really love hanging out and nerding out about cool stuff, whether it's the stuff we do at work or the stuff we do in our personal lives. But yeah, thanks for sharing all the Twilio. I'm familiar with SendGrid, but I didn't even know Segment was. I think we use Segment at Clerk. I didn't even know that was owned by Twilio.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So in the 3 months you've been there, what is can you tell us any kind of cool stories about people you've interacted with who've used the product, who have kind of like had just a really cool eye-opening moment? Those are some of my favorite. Being a developer educator at Clerk and being able to talk about Clerk as an authentication platform, getting to talk through the product and seeing people's eyes like light up about how easy it makes things is one of my favorite things to experience.
Yeah, so one thing so I can definitely share a kind of a cool story that happened in the first I guess even month that I was at the company. Is I went to, so I'm based on Vancouver Island, which is on the west coast of Canada. You sort of go to Vancouver and then you hit ocean and then you just keep going and eventually you hit an island. And so we're this tiny little tech community, and every company that I've ever worked for, nobody has had any idea what we do. And so I'd go to events and I would be like, hey, I work for X company. And people would be like, great, what do they do? So I went to a holiday, like a Christmas mixer for the local technology kind of incubator space. And I was there, and the first person I talked to, the first kind of startup that I met with, I was like, hey, so I'm Andrew. And they're like, oh, Andrew, what do you do? And I said, oh, I just started as a developer educator at this company called Twilio. And they were like, oh my God, Twilio is amazing. In fact, Twilio is the underlying technology for our entire platform. And I was like, oh my God, that's amazing. And we kind of had this conversation around sort of like the reason that they'd kind of chosen Twilio. And I was like, okay, this is the one-off. This was like the universe giving me the like, it's awesome that you're working for Twilio. And then I actually went to another tech event like 2 weeks later, almost the same conversation. First company I talked to, they were like, yeah, it just so happens that like Twilio is the underlying technology. And then I actually met sort of one of the developers from one of these companies and sat down for coffee, and they kind of explained sort of what it was about sort of the platform that had kind of gotten them to where they could go. And it was just like, I think the interesting story here was Twilio had always been about the people for me, and going to these events, it just continued to be about the people with the people that I met with. So yeah, it was just super cool to go and actually meet these people that has this underlying technology that's powering their entire system.
That's cool. You don't hear those stories about many other companies. I mean, whenever I see tools that are basically leveraging another platform to kind of power everything, it's usually like the AWS, the Azures, those kind of big cloud providers. So it's interesting to hear Twilio is kind of in that similar, I don't know, mindset vein, if you will. Um, So let's round out our conversation about Twilio before we move on to some of the other things you've worked on. So if developers wanted to get started with Twilio, what are some common use cases? Like say I'm an indie developer building a side project, something that I want to generate some revenue off of, which is kind of the target audience of the podcast. What kind of problem would Twilio solve for me? Like, I know you said there's a bunch of different, it's a suite of products, right? But like ground level, what are some things that the different offerings within Twilio can solve for a developer?
Yeah. It's really interesting that you bring this up. So I actually, as part of my role, one of the programs that I am sort of in charge of is our new sort of like developer onboarding series called Liftoff, which is sort of like Liftoff with Twilio. In there, we sort of take a product and like one of our product suites and then say like, here's a use case for them. Sorry, that didn't help. That was just me giving like a little bit of poking everybody to go look up Liftoff. One of the big ones is marketing use cases. Those marketing emails, people come to your website, they sign up and say, hey, I want to be notified when like you go live. So you can actually like set up that entire system. You register a phone number. You set up the process of if somebody kind of sends you a text message, then they get added to this marketing list. It's the same on kind of the email side. So really like if you're looking to set up a way to communicate with your potential future users or your current users, it's a great platform to be able to do that. And because you can kind of get voice and email and text messages and WhatsApp messages and all the rest of this, you've got all these different channels, user identity and authentication as well. There's a bunch of different tools that are in there as well. So if you're looking for sort of two-factor authentication, like that kind of an idea, Twilio is really well set up for that. I mean, it's just because it's sort of this customer experience as a whole, you really are, if you're looking to kind of track your, like the journey of your customers or your users, like you basically have every tool that you need in this same suite. But yeah, I think marketing is a great one. It's one that we talk about a lot. I think that the sort of the identity and authentication stuff is another one. And then just in general, sort of like being able to track the user journey, not track, that's the wrong word, but like being able to like see what the user journey is and sort of make that experience even better.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, well, let's be real. I think the idea of tracking a user in modern day has kind of become like a dirty term or dirty thing. But the harsh reality of it is when somebody's building products, it's useful data to figure out what areas of your application are getting the most use case or getting the most use. So this way you can build on top of them and make them better. So I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I felt the need to call it there. Also for identity and access management use clerk because we're awesome. So,
I love it. I love this.
just
I love it. It's like
throwing that
battling
out
the
there.
battle of the authentication system.
No, we're not going to get into. We're not taking the podcast down that route. All right, let's move out of that. So, before the show, we were talking about kind of like we were covering bases on what we wanted to talk about during this thing, right? And you had mentioned you had built a couple of these little projects with. I say little projects. It's just the term that I'm using. They might not be little. They might be massive. I have no idea, but use Laravel, use PHP to build some things you had mentioned. So talk through some of those projects and ideas, your experience building them, how successful they were, what the terms of success were. I don't know. Just let's just chat about that.
Yeah, I love it. I don't get to talk about this stuff on podcasts enough, so like thanks for giving the space. I talked earlier about sort of my journey into the world of programming was kind of weird, and I started in that WordPress world. Didn't love it. Like it was great, but it was very theme focused, and like I didn't that wasn't the vibe that I was going for. There was so much overhead there. But it was kind of the world that I've been exposed to. Fast forward a few years, I was doing my teaching degree. I'd already started an education master's degree and had done some research around at a local independent school that was doing like a really innovative style of teaching, which basically was like personalized learning for each student. And learning management systems that exist out there today and assessment systems are focused on like one teacher, 20 students, not like one student, 20 projects, one teacher, 20 students. So like the multipliers are insane for like the number of kind of things you're needing to manage. And so I've been doing some research with this school on their assessment system in this kind of an inquiry-based personalized learning model. And by the time I kind of returned to finish my master's degree, my research, which had initially just intended to be sort of like, I'm going to help you develop a rubric to assess this way, had been stagnating. And so I was writing my final thesis, and I was like, oh my God, this is like a terrible thesis. I need to do something to make it better. And I ended up creating a Google Sheets app that basically took this like paper printable rubric and turned it into this digital form that every teacher could go into, and they could assess students, and sort of it would give you an output of a report in like this really unique style. And that was amazing. And I went to defend the thesis and show it to the school afterwards. And there was a bunch of teachers that were like, "Hey, so can students do this in there?" And I was like, "Well, no." And then somebody else was like, "Well, can I do this in there?" And they were like, "No." And we kind of got through the session, and everybody had asked me these questions about like, "Can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this?" And I said, no, but let me come back to this. And so I was in this unique position where I had a job in tech that was part-time, and I was teaching part-time, and I had this like 2-day window during the week where I just like had space to do things. And so I set this mission out to see if I could build out this application in more than what than I'd been able to build on like this Google Sheets kind of MVP. And or M minimum lovable product. I like that term better. And because I'd been with PHP, I'd been looking around, and React scared me. And a lot of these other kind of JavaScript frameworks, I was like, oh, this is just like, it's not my vibe. And I found a YouTube channel for somebody who was building out a blog using like Laravel 8. And I watched this, and it was super accessible, and they went through every single thing. And then I started to go into Stack Overflow. This was before ChatGPT was sort of this big thing to be able to use in Gen AI. And I'd always had bad experiences on Stack Overflow and started to have better experiences. And then I went into the Discord, and I went into all these places and just kept getting help and answers and resources. And it was just this amazing experience of like finding this platform that had all these resources that were freely available, and this amazing community that was willing to provide you support. Yeah, so I basically went from this Google Sheets app to this Laravel 8 based tall stack. If you don't know what that is, it's Tailwind CSS, Alpine JS, which is like a micro JavaScript framework. Something called Livewire, which is kind of like a new version of Ajax, if you've ever used that before, and Laravel. And it was this amazing stack that allowed for me to get this tool out there for this school to use. And yeah, so that was like 2021. The first version of the actual tool went out to be used. I've now got like 500 users on the platform. There's been over 2,000 assessments. There's like 2,000 individual inquiries that are being tracked in it. It's got everything from like a message board, as if you were in like a Google Classroom, to a like a private chat functionality between all the teachers can chat with a single student. It's got project management tools in it. It's got a journal in it. It's got like a notepad, like kind of a Google Docs system in it. And it kind of became my playground for learning new technologies and implementing sort of things that I liked about different platforms into this new space. Yeah, and so it's been absolutely fantastic. And then the Laravel ecosystem obviously has exploded, and so I chose this because I loved the community. And now it's just like every tool you could ever want and imagine is now available for kind of this community.
Oh my gosh, there's so much from everything you just said that I want to unpack here. I'm gonna have to choose my next questions wisely though. First off, echoing Laravel community is awesome. So I'm not a Laravel developer. I don't know anything. I don't know much about Laravel. I can't say anything because I did dabble with it a little bit. But I did get the pleasure of going to one of the Laravel conferences. I can't LaraCon 23, I think, when it was in Tennessee. Community is awesome. Everyone there was super cool, super down to earth. Just loved, just seemed like genuinely nice people. So I'll echo that. But let's see. I guess my follow-up question to this platform, which sounds incredible and amazing, is sorry, hold on. We're gonna stop here one more time. I told you my mind was like all over the place after you
No,
were
it's all
talking.
good. It's all good, Brian.
I also wanted to call out to people who are building something out there that these types of projects are amazing for learning new tech. And I like that you had specifically mentioned that you use this platform to experiment and build new things. I've got my own side project that I have not touched in a long time, admittedly, and I need to get back to it. But it's called Guardian Force. It's based around something that I'm passionate about, which is the video game called Destiny. But same concept. I just threw so much into this application that it gives me opportunities when I want to experiment with some new piece of tech. Like, let's just see if we can swap out this piece here with this old piece with this new piece and just see how it interacts. So these types of projects are great ways for people to like learn and grow their own skill sets. But what I wanted to get to is throughout the process. So it sounds like you've identified a potential market just based on showing off a proof of concept and having people come and talk to you about it, even if it was very rudimentary, like you had mentioned, Google spreadsheet. But what other challenges did you face along the way once you made that decision that I want to take this idea and concept into a real, web project? What are some of the challenges and struggles you faced along the way?
Yeah, so the first one is scope. Because it's your own kind of thing and you can do everything, it's really challenging to not try and do everything. So it was kind of like scoping it down to things that were manageable that I could kind of pull off. Deployment was a big thing, like having a hosting environment and like a CI/CD pipeline that was smooth that allowed for me to like have a testing staging space to kind of get things out there. It was like I spent so much time looking at the different options, and that was like a huge challenge. And then I think probably the like single biggest challenge that I kind of faced going through this process was um the things that you don't account for when you're building that you suddenly need to address in real time. So like I had a situation where like I suddenly needed to have rate limiting added into this application, just because like I was getting a lot of calls against the API. And so like having to in real time like stop what I was doing and go and figure out how to do this was intense, but it set me up for success moving forward. But you can't account for everything, and you've got to accept that if people are going to be using your tool, there are going to be those moments where like you kind of have to stop and do like rapid real-time learning.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, that's I've definitely encountered one of those myself throughout the process. But all right, one last question, and we'll end on this one. And to be frank, Andrew, I think at some point I'd like to have you back in the future just to like dive deeper into these projects. I think this is a whole other thing that we can probably have a full half-hour conversation on. But for aspiring builders and people who are interested in creating their own product, and ideally it's with the intention of, hey, let's generate some revenue on the side, whether it's to go full time or just kind of like have some fun money to play around with. What are some one I'll say one piece of advice that you would have for people who are thinking about getting into this space?
Be passionate personally about what you're building and build it to solve your problem. If you are just building for somebody else, even if they're the best person in the world with the deepest pockets, it's very unlikely that you are going to have as much success as if you are building a tool that solves a problem for you, that also could solve problems for others. But I feel like had I not been a teacher in kind of this specific model of learning, I would never have taken it as far as I did. It was a thing that I needed to do my work better, and therefore it was a thing that I was invested in a really deep way. So find a thing that you personally are passionate about. I guarantee you there's like billions of people on the planet. There are other people that are going to be interested in this. And marketing, honestly, is a really hard thing, but it's a lot less challenging if you love the product already.
Love that. Andrew, where can people find you online?
Yeah, anywhere where there's internet, you can find me. So if you basically look up Andrew D. MacLean anywhere on the internet, I'm on X, I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on LinkedIn. You can go to andrewdmaclean.com if you want to find me there, and then it's got all the links to all the different places that I am as well.
Thank you so much for joining me, and thanks for sharing your experience, some insights about Twilio, some insights about your product. Anyone who is interested in finding Andrew, if they need, links will be in the show notes down below, whether you're watching this on YouTube or after the fact on your favorite podcatcher, I think they're called. But with that, I will we'll see you all in the next one. Thank you so much for watching in real time, and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.